Welcome to The Market That Moves America, a podcast from the National Center for the Middle Market. The center is the leading source of knowledge, leadership, and innovative research on the middle market economy. Throughout our podcast, we will feature middle market leaders and stakeholders to hear their real-world perspectives on trends and emerging issues.
Welcome to The Market That Moves America. My name is Doug Farron, Managing Director of the National Center for the Middle Market, located at The Ohio State University Fisher College of Business. I'm very excited about today's episode as we have a conversation about a recent research report that the center released in collaboration with the Wells Fargo Commercial Bank. Joining me today is Moses Harris, who is the Black and African American segment leader at Wells Fargo Commercial Bank, and we did a study together looking at these businesses across the United States. So welcome, Moses.
Thank you, Doug. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very excited about this conversation.
Same here. So tell us a little bit about your background and experience.
I am a 14-year veteran of Wells Fargo. Fun fact, I actually interned in Wells Fargo during the Great Financial Recession in 2008. And I spent a few seconds in the NFL playing for the St. Louis Rams. I got cut and I became a banker. and after my time in the NFL, I really enjoyed my internship experience. And so I saw a job posting for a entry-level analyst position in the commercial bank in Oakland, California. And I joined the bank, and I've been here ever since. My first job out of college and have been in the industry. I've worked in 4 different groups within the bank and lived in 4 different cities. So I've moved around, seen a lot, and I've done a lot. And I'm currently, as you mentioned in the intro, the Black African American segment leader in commercial banking. I get this question every day. Moses, what does that mean? What do you do? And I'm happy to break that down. And it's pretty simple. My responsibility really is to grow, deepen, and retain the existing relationships that we already have with Black-owned middle market firms. And that's when we talk about middle market, we're talking about companies with revenues between $25 and $1 billion, $25 million and $1 billion in revenue. And I'm also tasked with the acquisition of new relationships. So I work with bankers all across the country to identify opportunities, really help them understand the needs of our customers. And I work with leadership across the bank to tailor solutions. And my favorite part about my job, I get to raise awareness around what's going on with the Black middle market. And I also work closely with people across the country to create partnerships and programs and to help these business owners achieve their personal and business financial goals and, to generate wealth for these owners and operators.
Yeah, great description of that, because I was going to ask you about your current role. Why is all that so necessary?
Well, if we look as American citizens, if we look in history, I think in like the 40s and 50s, the country was predominantly just simply Black and white. And if we fast forward, 150 years and we look at 2045, 2050, our country is going to be majority minority, meaning people of color are going to make up the majority of our country, which is a great thing. And it's important that Wells Fargo adopts its products and services to meet the new consumer where they're going to be. In business, we talk about the company that provides the most value wins. The company that's able to meet its customers where they're at wins. It's a way for us to not only survive, but to thrive in the new economy. What businesses are going to be doing in 20 years are very different. Well, potentially different. How businesses do business is going to change in the future. And Wells Fargo wants to be well positioned to do that. And so at Wells Fargo, we created a line of business called Diverse Segments, Representation, and Inclusion. And myself and a few colleagues across the enterprise, we actually sit in a line of business and we work to roll out the strategy of making the bank more approachable, more friendly, and engaging our commitment and authenticating our commitment with diverse communities. So specifically in commercial banking, there's a women's segment leader, a Hispanic segment leader, an Asian segment leader, a veteran segment leader, myself, Native segment leader, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that was a mouthful, but yeah, that's what we're doing. That's why it matters.
That's great. As I've gotten to know you and had the privilege of working with you over this last year plus, you are very passionate. You have a vision around this. But could you talk a little bit about why this work personally resonates for you?
Yeah, so I come from a family of entrepreneurs, really small, independent business owners. My grandfather was a handyman, and my grandmother, she was a hat maker for many years. And I spent a lot of time with them in the summers, and it was just really enriching for my development, just to watch how Black folks took care of their families economically over the past decades. Very seldomly was a career in corporate America an option, for my grandparents. So entrepreneurship was really the way that they took care of themselves and took care of their family. And I remember a few stories that my grandma would tell me about what it was like to be an entrepreneur, i.e. a Black farmer in the rural South. And she told me this story. One day, she was about 12 years old. She was working in the fields of her grandma's house. And this white guy gets out the car and he has a ruler with him. And he begins to measure the distance between where her seeds were being planted. Because at the time, Black folks weren't allowed to plant seeds less than 12 feet apart, or 12 inches apart, a foot apart. And the purpose of that was to ensure that Black farmers' yields were suppressed and they weren't overperforming. And my grandma would always remind us that there's two Americas, one for Black folks and one for others. And so this work is really personal to me, because when we look at the data, we look at the research, we can see that there is an inequitable share, an underrepresentation of Black businesses in the middle market, as well as publicly traded in the equity markets. And I'm not sure if that story is being told on a national scale. Mm-hmm. And it's important to me that we continue to amplify. There was a study that was done by the U.S. Feds and essentially said that over a 20-year period, $16 trillion of gross domestic product was excluded from our economy because of the lack of economic inclusion of BIPOC communities. Doug, I don't know about you, but $16 trillion is a lot of money. And there's a lot that we can do about that. And going back to where the country's going, we cannot afford to repeat those same mistakes. So this work is personal, and as an American citizen, it's also it's an imperative. It's not a nice to have. It's not the right thing to do. It's like, no, if we are going to be competitive on a global scale, inclusion has to be in our business plan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And when Wells Fargo, yourself, Dr. Judd Murchie, the team approached us about collaborating on this project, it was really intriguing because I think you brought up maybe a subtle point there, which is the small business story I think has largely been kind of explored and told, maybe repeatedly. But this idea of looking at what's going on in the middle market was really intriguing to us, and that was really important for us as we got engaged into this work. Why do you think it's important to continue to tell this story of the Black middle market?
Yeah, and Doug, you're spot on. It's important for us to tell this story because the advocacy points for a company that's trying to go from $1 million in revenue to $2 million in revenue are very different from a company that's trying to go from $50 million in revenue to $75 million in revenue, et cetera.
Yep.
Oftentimes in the small business space, we hear access to capital, talent retention, et cetera. But when we get into the middle market, the advocacy points are very nuanced, and we need to continue to articulate those stories and the data, empirical data, so that we can, as an industry, work with regulators, work with procurement officers, work with commercial banks to make sure that the policies and procedures that we have in place are factoring in the key advocacy points that these Black businesses in the middle market are offering up. With the data, with the stories and the narratives that everyone understands, we're able to create innovative solutions that brings the middle market up to parity with where it should be.
Yeah. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are only perhaps 5 or 6 publicly traded Black-owned companies on American stock exchanges, which may come as a surprise to a lot of people. What is your take on that? Like, how did we get to that point? Because as we discovered through the process of this work, like, it was very difficult to find middle market companies, right? That had Black ownership. They were above 25 million. Like give us a little bit of perspective on that issue. So middle market, large business, like, there's just very few of these companies.
Doug, I so appreciate this question, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to shed light. And I will say for our listeners' benefit, I don't have the monopoly on this perspective. These are my opinion and what I think. And I think it starts with capital, and I think it starts with the Emancipation Proclamation. I think that in the last 20 years, really the last 10 years, venture capital has really been a pretty seductive conversation to have in finance circles with Sequoia Capital and Anderson Horowitz, et cetera. But venture capital has been around for hundreds of years. America was founded based on venture capital. The term underwriting, we're underwriting ships to voyage to new lands. And so when we think about financial markets and the history of financial markets, really the transatlantic slave trade was really the backbone of making financial markets extremely robust, from insurance companies to distribution companies, et cetera. Are one of the first products that was actually traded on the stock exchange were slaves themselves. And folks at that time did not have access to capital to start their own farm, to start their own venture. Legally, they could not. It was racial segregation was a law, and indeed prevented people of color, specifically Black folks, from starting a business, owning their business, et cetera. But we did have some hope in 1865 with the Emancipation Proclamation, which, let Black slaves participate in the American dream. And on the heels of Emancipation Proclamation, we had the Federal Bureau Act of 1865, which was really, really powerful. And most Americans know it as the 40 acres and a mule. And so from that, I think only about 15% of Black slaves actually received their actual 40 acres and a mule. And after 9 months of that act going live, it actually was terminated by the next regime. Following that, Doug, we had the Reconstruction period, which layered in Jim Crow, Black codes, and other systemic programs and institutional policies that really kept Black folks as underclass citizens. So what Black folks would do is they would work in communities to raise capital, i.e. venture capital, to get their farms off the ground, as agriculture was like 90% of the economy at the time. And to scale, Doug, we had to distribute the products. And that was really hard for Black folks to do. So folks that were able to really benefit from the robust financial markets were able to buy assets and businesses at market lows. If we think about the Great Depression in 1929, a lot of Americans suffered from that. But there were very few industry titans that were able to, buy up steel lines and equipment, oil refineries, et cetera, which are high barrier to entry industries, commercial real estate, et cetera. So now, as we move through the decades, Doug, these businesses were able to become incumbents in the capitalistic society that really gave them an advantage. Regulations were looser at the time. And fast forward again, Black folks weren't really invited to the party, did not have access to contracts, didn't have access to equipment, et cetera, at the same pace as their white counterparts. So you have folks that really had decades and decades and decades of a head start to participate in the American dream. And majority of the companies that we see on the publicly traded markets generally were founded in over 50 years ago. And so if we look at the average date of middle market companies, they have a birth date under 40 years. So I know that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but I'll close with a quick analogy. So Doug, in my house, we had a family fun night every Friday, and we got to pick the different games that we wanted to play. And my favorite game growing up, Doug, was Monopoly. I love Monopoly. And my dad somehow would always win. And we had this epic game where my dad won with $1. So I began to watch and study my dad over the years. And what he would do every time he would land on a property, he'd say, I'm buying it. I'm buying it. And so instead of passing or waiting, one round around the board to, save up your money and purchase, it didn't matter. My dad would always buy assets. Imagine if your family was playing Monopoly for 2 hours and they said, okay, Doug, now you can play. Yeah. Okay. So you roll and you land on Baltic Avenue. Okay. Your sister has 3 houses on it. So you have to pay her. Right? Okay. So there's your little money. Then you roll again, and then you turn the right corner, and then you land on St. Charles Place. And then you got to pay your brother, $600. Like, what? Okay. And then you keep playing, so on and so forth. And then you land on Kentucky Ave, and your mom has a hotel on it, right? So on and so forth. Yeah. The challenge with being a Black business owner at this time is it's like playing Monopoly after 2 hours. a lot of the assets have been acquired at historical lows, and it's hard for Black folks to be able to participate in an economy and buy assets at a discounted value. Oftentimes, we see high levels of commodity. We see over concentrations in low margin industries that really are heavy oriented in the labor space and service oriented, very kind of asset light industries. Okay, that was a mouthful. Sorry, Doug.
No, great context. No, I appreciate it. I think that context is very important to understand. So let's jump into the report. If you could, Moses, tell us what were the goals of Wells Fargo collaborating with NCMM on this study of Black-owned middle market companies. You've already talked about some of the need to have these stories, but what were some of the other goals and objectives that you had?
Yeah, really the goal of the report was to be able to provide insights to very interested key stakeholders at the firm and in the industry that really wanted to understand, like, Moses, what is going on in the Black middle market. I was on a call this is in 2021 with our environmentally ESG team. And at the time, there was a proposal out for sustainability bonds. And if a company achieves certain key performance indicators, KPIs, such as reducing carbon emissions or retaining a diverse workforce, they would receive a benefit in the form of maybe a lower interest rate, et cetera. So on the call, I was like, whoa, this is really fascinating. What would it look like if diverse business owners were able to receive some type of pricing benefit or a different product, et cetera, just for staying in business? So we're rewarding large corporations for hiring low-wage workers, but we're not offering the same incentive for diverse business owners. And I just simply raised that to the folks on the call. And, the woman was like, Moses, no one's really ever asked me that question before. Can you help me articulate what are those advocacy points for Black-owned businesses? And, at the time, I was well prepared to speak about, Black infant mortality, incarceration rates, recidivism, life expectancy, hypertension, et cetera. But I really did not have empirical data, Doug, to help me articulate what really is going on, specifically in the Black middle market, not small business, not Black homeowners, not appraisal issues, but literally a $75 million Black-owned company and a $75 million white-owned company. That was the background and the intentions behind the report, so that we can tell a story with data.
Yeah. And so what were some of the things that stood out with you? What were some of the key findings that either were surprising or you found most interesting, impactful, so on?
Yeah, the thing that I found the most exciting was that the Black middle market is actually growing at a faster clip than the general market, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And some of the insights from the leaders that I thought was really impactful that I wanted to think through and highlight was some of the things, the supplier diversity programs, their intentions are great and they're well founded. However, down the road, as a company begins to grow and scale, it can actually limit their growth potential. And I thought that was interesting insight, and I never thought about that before until speaking with some of these and reading the report.
Mm-hmm. So, how do you think non-diverse middle market company owners will react to these findings? Do you think there'll be any reaction to it, changes, whatever, either the companies themselves, or maybe we could even talk about like the banking industry? What do you see as some potential impacts there?
Yeah, I think recently we saw the SBA. I think the last month or two came out with a $5 million line of credit product, which is the first of its kind, the first time that they've done that. And I believe that's because there were years of advocacy points. They're saying, "Hey, it's really hard for me to get a line of credit above $2 million. We can get term loans, we can get real estate loans. We see that, but a line of credit, it that $2 to $5 million range historically has been hard for the commercial banking small business industry to lend into. And so, it, what I'm hoping, that will come from this report is deep insight into the procurement process, Doug, and how Black-owned businesses can participate in the ecosystem and the innovation of procurement. The worst thing that Black-owned businesses can do, Doug, is to sell antiquated products to corporate America, to sell products that were relevant in 2015, relevant in 2018, and not relevant for 2027. So I'm hoping that procurement and R&D companies are able to rethink how they invite and partner with their supply chain members and invite them into innovation sessions, et cetera, so that Black-owned businesses can work on their strategic plan and make sure that they're developing in the right direction. And on the commercial banking industry side, I really would love to expand our existing credit policy. And again, I'm not picking on Wells Fargo. I'm not picking on JP Morgan Chase or US Bank. It's really the way that the OCC and our regulators think about credit. And I want to go on the record and say credit policy is important. We have to have guide rails. We should be regulated. However, I think that there may be an opportunity to layer in some equitable evolution that factors in all companies and not just the large incumbents in the industry.
Yeah. As you know, we had participation from a lot of different groups who helped us with this study. Key of which is the National Minority Supplier Development Council and their Corporate Plus program. So we're excited about the opportunities to kind of build this conversation out into different channels and different avenues. And there's a lot of things we can do, I think, post report. So my last question for you today, Moses, is what advice would you give to companies that are looking to partner with these diverse owned businesses, whether they're Black owned, Native American, Hispanic? Like, what are you seeing out there, and what would you say to businesses that want to get further engaged with these companies?
I would repeat some of the things that I said earlier today, Doug. But really, it is the business case for America: inclusion, diversity, equity engagement, and inviting more diverse business owners to the table to participate in our economy is really how we're going to be sustained as a country over the next 50 years. So for our decision makers and leaders across industries, from our government friends, our business leaders, our bankers and our bank executives, to really approach the report with a fresh lens and to take a critical view and ask themselves, how do our existing policy and procedures inadvertently exclude diverse businesses? And I think that's a great place to start. In these conversations, Doug, I really do my best to try to stay away from indicting, individuals or individual companies, but really try to think in systems and think in policies, because that supersedes people. when I'm done in this role, running my leg of the race, I'm hoping that someone can build on the infrastructure that I, in partnership with others, help lay down.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that readers of the report think about the systems in which they participate in, and challenging themselves and leaders to think in terms of systemic impact and not individual engagement.
Yep. Well, that's a great way to close this conversation, but I think a great way to start, hopefully, a larger conversation across the country. So thanks again for your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Moses, and looking forward to all the great things that we get to do going forward.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, team. This has been fun.
So for more information, if you're interested in accessing the report on Black-owned middle market businesses, you can visit the NCMM website at middlemarketcenter.org. We've got some highlights in there, and then you can download the PDF. So welcome everybody to do that, and thanks again for joining us. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Market That Moves America. Never miss a new episode by subscribing anywhere podcasts can be found. You can also subscribe to our email newsletter at middlemarketcenter.org.